Hi guys, it's the 9th of June. Just going to do a quick wrap up of some of the things happening in our regions. In East Asia Pacific today, we covered 23 events, as well as, of course, the detailed Myanmar daily report for our clients. In East Asia Pacific, clashes occurred in Makassar yesterday. Makassar's on the southern end of Sulawesi. The clashes occurred during a protest. It was basically a group of Papuan students. They were demonstrating against Jakarta's plan to create more provinces in Papua. The Papuans, of course, many of them interpret that as a divide and conquer without necessarily seeing the pros, which are, of course, increased development and budgets. Members of an unspecified organisation attacked the students. Protesters moved towards a nearby Papuan student dormitory, and police eventually stepped in and dispersed members of the organisation. Another issue that occurred of interest was a helicopter crash east of Timika yesterday. Uday, I know you produced the advisory on that. You might like to just give us a quick brief on that.
Right, Paul. So there was a helicopter traveling from Jila in Mimika Regency to Timika when it made a crash landing. It was carrying about 11 passengers, including 3 crew. One person is missing. The helicopter was being used by the Regency government to evacuate people from remote areas to medical centers in Timika. And authorities sent out 3 helicopters for search and rescue after that, Paul.
Thanks, mate. Now, when you say evacuate, do you mean routine medical movements from Jila to Timika to get them to medical support, or was there an actual evacuation in process?
No, it's for people with any medical condition, for example, pregnancies in rural areas within Mimika Regency. So it was used as a health helicopter, basically, for health services.
And I believe in Nduga recently there was a shooting of an aircraft. We've got to stress to our clients, both Nduga and where the plane came down are way outside of out of the area of operations at Freeport, operating on a day-to-day basis, though they do have some movements for exploration and logistics purposes to these locations, or at least used to. What's the best read at this stage? I know it's very early, but is it most probably pilot error, given it was in the lowlands, so unusual or not as usual for accidents there, or we just don't know at this stage?
It seems to be pilot error, Paul, because there are some reports that the weather turned after the helicopter went in the air soon after. So it seems to be pilot error at this point.
Okay, and there has been some shootings of aircraft. I know offhand there in Nduga, some pilots have been reporting bullet holes. Anything to add on that, Uday? Or
Yeah, Paul. We have talked, I think, extensively last year about the risks of air travel in Papua, especially with the West Papuan National Liberation Army, and they have targeted aircraft and helicopters in the Highland Regency. So it's definitely riskier to travel there, aside from just the weather and the lack of training that pilots have. So
yeah, I think that's the real key. That obviously a lot of Indonesian pilots don't want to work in Papua just because of the cultural differences and the distance from their families. So the skill levels, I think, is really prudent to make sure that you vet which air providers you're using, and to make sure that they in turn have a process to choose pilots. There are some wonderful pilots in Papua, but it's getting more and more difficult to get expatriates in. Expatriates, of course, are more culturally comfortable there, and it's more than happy for them to fly, but we need to keep an eye on that, because reports from various air companies, it's getting more expensive to get parts in, it's getting harder to get pilots in. That's all from East Asia. Thanks.
all right, thanks, Paul. So in South Asia today, we covered 14 events. The thing I want to talk about is the Indian government has tightened security after Al Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent threatened to carry out attacks in Delhi, Mumbai, and Uttar Pradesh and Gujarat. Earlier this week, they had sent a letter threatening suicide attacks in these places, and this is all over the controversy made by some members of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party regarding Prophet Muhammad. So Al Qaeda itself does not have much strength in India at this point, and it probably cannot carry out suicide attacks. But the bigger question is that in a environment with wider religious polarization, there is the threat of terror attacks in India. Bhargav, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Certainly, that we certainly have to look closely towards the security paradigm across South Asia and specifically India, with the recent communal issues coming out of the mosque or the recent statement on Prophet Muhammad. However, we should note that since 2014, Indian security forces have successfully averted many major, incidents of bombs being planted, and there were no major attacks in metropolitan cities, with exception of Kashmir and Northeast. At the same time, it is very hard to dismiss or question the recent threats being made by terror groups, especially Al-Qaeda, despite the fact that Al-Qaeda's capability in the subcontinent has diminished over a period of time. Similar threats were made back in 2019 when Article 360 was abrogated and Kashmir was divided. And similar threats came about last year when Kabul fell to Taliban, which basically upended the capability of terror groups. So there we'll have to look very closely on how things evolve in the next 3 to 6 months period. And we certainly cannot take these threats lightly.
Yeah, definitely, Bhargav. And with that, it's a wrap for the Asia Pacific region. We'll see you all next week. Thanks.